Salam everyone. Today I would like to talk about the concept of jizya, which is mentioned in Surah 9 verse 29. In traditional Islam, jizya is understood to be a tax that's ordained upon the non-Muslim living in a Muslim country. But we know this idea does not make sense simply because God, for example, says, La ikraha fid din. There is no compulsion in the system. So how could it be that there is no compulsion in the system and yet somehow we're supposed to impose a tax on the non-Muslim? It simply does not make sense. So let's reapproach this concept from a Quran alone standpoint to see exactly what God is talking about here. 929 reads, You shall fight those who do not believe in God or the last day, nor they prohibit what was prohibited by God and his messenger, nor they system of the truth from those who receive the scripture, until they give the jizya for YADIN while they are belittled. There are two important key terms we must be aware of here, jizya and YADIN. And in order to understand the jizya, we must understand it in the context of this phrase. JIZYA YDN وهم صاغرون. Jizyata for YADIN while they are belittled. So the word jizya comes from the root JIZYA, which means a recompense. A thing that you worked for, whether it is positive or negative, the result of that is a jizya. This is why the form jaza in the Quran refers to a reward. So jizya can be translated as recompense. So God says, you shall fight them until they give the recompense. Then he says, for YADIN. The Arabic word YADIN is often understood as a hand, and this is true. However, when we look in the Quran at the various forms of YADIN, we will see that some verses refer to a physical hand, whereas other verses refer to the symbolic or functional aspect of a hand. The function of a hand is to create a power of control. It gives you the ability to control certain things. This is why, for example, in Surah 38 verse 45, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are called Al-Aidi, hands. God obviously wasn't talking about their physical hands. He was talking about how they were resourceful. Okay? So I would render YADIN in 929 based on the grammar and the grammatical construct of the verse as a symbolic meaning of hand, okay, or the functional aspect of a hand, which is control, ability to control. God does not say in this verse, for example, he does not say that you shall fight them until you take from their hands a jizya. This would mean a physical hand. He does not say, for example, you shall fight them until they give the jizya with their hands or from their hands. No, God does not say anything like that. God says, jizyata an YADIN, or recompense for YADIN, okay, hand. Okay, so I would render YADIN here as referring to the symbolic meaning of a hand, which is control. So to put it all together, God says, you shall fight them until they give the recompense for control. Recompense for control. So now the question is, what is God talking about here? What is this recompense for control? In order to understand this particular phrase, we must understand what is Surah 9 talking about to begin with. So allow me to give you an overview of Surah 9 very briefly. Surah 9 talks about a specific event during the lifetime of the Prophet happening in and around a place called Masjid Al-Haram, Masjid Al-Haram can be translated as place of submission of the prohibitions. It was called such a place because it was considered a godly place where certain prohibitions were imposed. Okay, one of these prohibitions was fighting was prohibited. Okay, I invite everybody to read Surah 22 verses 25 through 28. God tells us the purpose of Masjid Al-Haram. He tells us that Masjid Al-Haram is actually for all the people, not just the Muslims, but for all the people. So everybody from all over the world or the region were allowed to go into this place as long as they respected the law, including no fighting. Fighting was prohibited. We also learned from Surah 22 that the purpose of a Masjid Al-Haram during the Hajj season is to create commerce, to have commerce, trade between the people, as well as to commemorate God and to feed the poor. So keep that in mind. Keep the purpose of Masjid Al-Haram in mind as we read Surah 9. So when we begin reading Surah 9 from the beginning all the way to verse 29, we see several things happening. We see that the idolaters at that time were actually the custodians of Masjid Al-Haram. They were running the show. They were running the commerce. Okay. By the way, when I say idolater, I don't necessarily mean a person who worships another statue or a statue. I also refer to any person, okay, any person who creates, for example, a man-made law and attributes that man-made law to God. They have created idolatry. They have created association with God. And this is another definition of a mushrik or an idolater. And so keep that in mind. The idolaters at that time were running the show. They were the custodians of Masjid Al-Haram. Then we also see in Surah 9 that there was a peace treaty between these idolaters and the Muslims. There was a peace treaty. They were at Masjid Al-Haram, and there was also a peace treaty between them. But eventually, some of these idolaters began to break and breach this peace treaty and started attacking the Muslims for the purpose of getting rid of the messenger. So God gave the green light for the Muslims to start defending themselves, to start fighting the idolaters, and eventually drive them out of the land. This is because the idolaters broke the basic law, the prohibited laws of the land. They started disrespecting the sanctity of the area. And so God gave the Muslims the green light to drive them out of this area. And this is indicative as we get to verse 28 of Surah 9. The verse says, "O you who believe, the idolaters are polluted, so they shall not approach the masjid after this year." God is saying all of this, again, reading the context, because the idolaters were breaking the peace treaty, disrespecting the sanctity of the area. Okay, they were abusing their power. So God gave the Muslims the green light to kick them out. And the kicking them out isn't for the purpose of invasion, not at all. It was for the purpose of restoring the sanctity of the area because they were polluted. They were polluting the area. In that same verse, verse 28, God says, "And if you fear deprivation, then God will enrich you." The deprivation refers to the economy of Masjid Al-Haram. Again, because the idolaters were running the show, they were running the economy, the Muslims were afraid of driving them out of the area because that will affect the economy of Masjid Al-Haram. So this is all that's happening in Surah 9 as we come to verse 29. Okay, so keep that all in mind as we start reading verse 29. This is where God continues to say, "You shall fight those who do not believe in God or the last day." Because the idolaters violated the peace treaty, because they were violating the sanctity of the Masjid Al-Haram, they did not believe in God or the last day. Nor did they prohibit what was prohibited by God and his messenger. Nor did they system of the truth from those who received the scripture. This phrase, systemized system of the truth from those who received the scripture, in Arabic it's وَلَا يَدِينُونَ دِينَ الْحَقِّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابِ. The word deen does not mean religion. A lot of people interpret this phrase as converting to Islam. No. The verse says, وَلَا يَدِينُونَ دِينَ الْحَقِّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابِ. They do not system of the truth from those who receive the scripture. The word deen means system. It's a system of laws. Okay? In Surah 12, the king had a deen. Okay? Deen al-Malik. The deen of the king. The king did not have a religion. He had a deen, a system of laws. Okay, so here God isn't talking about some religion. God is talking about a system of truth from those who receive the scripture. God is telling us that we shall that the Muslims shall fight the idolaters who were not systemizing system of the truth from those who receive the scripture. Again, this is all because they were violating the sanctity of the area. Then God says, until they give the recompense for control while they are belittled. Until they give the recompense for control while they are belittled. So the recompense for control refers to the idolaters giving the recompense for control in regards to Masjid Al-Haram. Basically, telling the believers to fight the idolaters until they give the recompense for control of the Masjid Al-Haram. That's because, again, the idolaters were the custodians. So God is telling the Muslims, go ahead, fight them, get rid of them until they give you that recompense for control of Masjid Al-Haram. This is what this verse is talking about. This is the jizya that God is talking about. To further reinforce this, look at the last two words, وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ, while they are belittled. The word صَاغِرُونَ, it means to make something small, diminished. Okay, so God is basically saying, fight them until they give the recompense for control while they are diminished, being diminished. Okay, driving them out of the land. You're diminishing their presence. This is evident. The word Saghirun can also be found in Surah 27, where Solomon threatened the queen of Sheba that they will drive them out of the land while they are Saghirun, diminished, belittled. Okay, so again, the concept of jizya has nothing to do with some tax. Okay, it has everything to do with the context of Masjid Al-Haram. It has everything to do with regaining the recompense of control for control of Masjid Al-Haram and driving out the idolaters from that area. This is what this verse is talking about. Nothing to do with any tax. And to further reinforce this, we start reading the next couple of verses after verse 29, which talks about how certain groups of the Christians and the Jews were saying certain things that were not allowed in Masjid Al-Haram. And then we see that these specific idolaters were actually taking their monks and priests as lords, okay, violating the sanctity of Masjid Al-Haram. And then we also see that these monks and priests were also abusing their powers, taking gold and silver from the people. They were abusing the economy. So God is basically describing these types of idolaters who are not respecting the sanctity of Masjid Al-Haram. So anyway, this is how I understand the concept of the jizya. I hope I didn't take too much time, but inshallah in the future I will be addressing other parts of Surah 9 that need to be addressed. Wassalamu alaikum.